I want to talk about a fairly simple idea, which I call alignment. Most human suffering comes from being misaligned. And conversely, happiness tends to arise when we're aligned. So I guess the real question comes up, what's aligning with what? And who's doing the aligning? Well, in the simplest terms, really, you are aligning with yourself. Which seems to make sense when you hear the words, but what's he talking about? What's me and what's myself? And how do they get misaligned? And what do I do to fix it? Let's start with me and then go to myself. Me is the sense of who we are. Who are we? Most people, if asked who they are, will say, I am, and they will give you a name. Bruce. John. Elena. Sounds completely believable. That's who I am. I am this body, this head, this mind, the thing that's speaking. Very identifiable. It's very clear who I am. Sometimes this sense of who I am is happy. Sometimes it's not happy. Sometimes it's confused. Sometimes it knows what it's doing. Sometimes it doesn't know what it's doing. And if you really examine this I am, this personhood, this being that I think I am, you discover, watching the process, and I've talked about this recently because I have a new granddaughter and I'm watching how this sense of I am begins. And in the very beginning it's not there. There's nothing but a great awareness. It's just this incredible awareness that seems to have emotion and attitude, degrees of clarity or non-clarity, but it's there. It's looking out at all of this and either very curious about it and very intrigued about it, or very threatened by it and frightened by it. So somehow there's a presence there that already has a kind of way of seeing. But that starts to become conditioned very quickly, and we all experienced it as children. We all experienced this thing of being acknowledged as a particular thing, a boy or a girl, a good boy or a bad boy, good girl, bad girl, at any given time. We were given all sorts of instructions about our behavior and rewarded for certain kinds of behavior and not rewarded or punished for bad behavior. And we started to shape into a form that we were called by other people with this name. And we become very identified with that. And this form very early on gets frustrated. I want 20 cookies. That's what I want. I want that whole jar. You can't have that whole jar. Why not? I want it. Because I said you can't. Because it's not good for you. Constriction, restraint, frustration, all of these things start to form in us, and we become this person. And it gets really complicated, as you all know, in varying degrees. Some people get unbelievably complicated. Some people have horror stories in their creation of their person. People die. Things happen. They do bad things. Shame occurs. All of these issues, confusions, and you have this thing that by the time you're coming to this class is very well formed. And it's really a mess. It's a bag of conflicting thoughts, ideas, emotions, and a lot of it is awful. Basically awful. And you come here because in some way, I think, you would like not to have to be this person. Or that you want to be this person, but you want to be a happier version of this person. A more aligned version of this person. That would make you right with the world. And so, you come here, or 500,000 other places you can go. You go to a psychiatrist, you go to church, you go to temple, you turn to whatever you can look to somehow begin to make you feel better about yourself. And mostly it doesn't work. Mostly it's, you go to a religious organization and they give you all of these rules that are really an extension of the rules your parents gave you. You can only have one cookie, or no cookies. Give up cookies altogether. And you become more constricted and feel worse about yourself. You go to a psychiatrist, and yes, I believe in psychiatry, and I believe it can be very helpful, but it can also be very confusing to examine yourself completely through the intellect, to look at yourself and not understand how you became who you became, or if you do understand how you became who you became, what do you do about it? How do I fix this thing? And there are various forms of prescription. Actually, go to any bookstore, or I guess now you go online, and just look up self-help. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of books about how to help yourself feel better about yourself. And every one of them works for a while. Everything works for a while. And then these old identities, if you will, these foundational ideas about who you are kick back in again. And you get tripped up, and you fall off the wagon, and you're not helped anymore. You feel just the opposite. You feel there is no help. There's nothing I can do. Life sucks. I talked about that last week. So there's a sense of misalignment. So let's talk about the self, because that was the me. Now myself. This is where people get really confused. What is myself? And how in any way is it different from me? Well, there are so many ways to describe the self, and you can go at it from many angles, and a lot of them confuse. They deeply confuse us. It cannot quite be approached intellectually. This self that I am stops working in terms of comprehension of it at a certain depth. You can only go so far, and then you go, it's not approachable. But this self that we are is at the source of everything we need to know about life, about who and what we are. It is the essence of our truth. And most of us do not know ourselves. And most of us think if we explore the me, we will get to ourself. If I dissect the me, if I dig deep into it, if I psychoanalyze it, if I meditate into the me, if I self-help the me, I will be fine. But it doesn't work. Because the me is not myself. It is a speck of myself. It is a manifested form of myself. But only by knowing yourself will any of the things you're seeking reveal themselves. I can talk about the self in ways you've heard before. It is all present. It is all knowing. It is all there is. It is the source of everything. It is the mystery of mysteries, the unknowable, the ground of being, love, totality, oneness, God. It is all of that. And somehow all of that has made you. Or you have arisen out of that self and become this. This in no way is cut off from that self. It is not separate from that self. It is completely one with that self, but it doesn't know itself. Every so often, yourself becomes visible to you. Every so often, yourself announces itself. Many of the times that it does that is when you're sitting absolutely still. You may be meditating, you may be listening to a song, you may be driving in the car, walking around the block. All of a sudden, there's this ineffable knowing, this sense of perfection. Someone once said it's like being a genius for 10 seconds. You know everything. It's just there. Yourself, in the simplest way, not dramatic, just in simple terms, is there. And you know it in some way that you cannot articulate, and that there's nothing you can do to grab it, or hold it, or do anything about it. It's just there. And then it's not. And then it's not there. Or at least it appears to be not there. Because what comes back in that moment is me. Me erupts like, oh, I got to do this tomorrow. Oh my God, I forgot to do that. And the self, the oneness of all being, seems to be completely eradicated by your need to pick up something at Starbucks. Gone. Where was that? What did I do? How did I get there? I want to go back to that. How can I get back to that? You can't get back to it. How can you get back to it? Because, among other things, it hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't gone anywhere. You went somewhere. The me went somewhere. The me went to Starbucks, or wherever it goes, all the time, all day long. The me is in constant activity because that's what the me does. The me is not a bad thing, even though it seems to remove you from this unbelievably extraordinary awareness, even though it somehow aborts this connectivity that you have. It is not in and of itself a bad thing. It is still an expression of the vastness of the universe. In some ways, not only is it an expression of it, it is an exact expression. It's exactly what it must be. The need to go to Starbucks is more important than you can possibly imagine because it makes the world work. The fact that you stubbed your toe is absolutely part of the perfection of this whole vast self. It doesn't feel like it in that moment, but it is. Every thought that goes through your head, everything you do and don't do, is an expression of this self. But it doesn't feel like an expression of the self because we are not aware of the self in it. The whole purpose of spiritual practice is to find a pathway to, a doorway to, a portal to ourself. And even in the best meditation, it's a limited experience. In the best meditation, and I've been in places where people meditate for 10 days, and I was around people who sit for that entire 10 days barely eating. They just are in a state of what I would call trance. Trance is a kind of me being absorbed in the self, me being conscious of the self. This is as close as a human being can get as a me to spiritual truth. Me, most of us don't sit for 10 days. Me, it often sits here for 1 hour. And in the course of the 1 hour that you've just sat here, I would venture to say somewhere about 1 minute and 30 seconds you were in touch with yourself. You may have been aware of it, you may not have been aware of it. But awareness of it is not always, oh, look at me being aware of it, because that immediately kind of tends to cut you away from it. What it is you're sitting there in this meditation and everything falls away. Not that you're feeling, I'm in touch with myself. What you're feeling is there's no me here. You're just feeling yourself. And what does that self feel like? Lots of words. Sweet, whole, good, comfortable, well, present, affirmed. That's what it feels like. Sometimes it becomes euphoric and explosively joyous. But much of the time, especially in this class, it feels like there's nothing to say. It's like, ah. And that's all it feels like. And your mind might say, is that all there is? But the mind can't comprehend what is. What is so big. And if you truly could let go of your mind for more than 1.5 minutes, let's say 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 8 minutes, you would start to have a deeper and deeper perception of this self. But here's the problem. These people sitting for 12 hours a day in touch with the self, it's still a me perceiving the self. And ultimately what happens in spiritual practice, for those who are blessed by the practice, is that the me is no longer perceiving the self. You become the self perceiving the me. The self becomes the awareness. The self becomes you. You realize you are yourself. That's the shift. So it's no longer me aware of, or me owning, or me celebrating, or me praying to the self. You are the self as the vast totality of being that includes this very tiny and beautiful and conflicted thing called me. When that happens, that little beautiful thing called me becomes very, very small. And it's so overwhelmed by the bigness of the self that it tends to get realigned very quickly into something that just is a voice of, a manifestation of, an expression of the totality of what one is. And that's called an awakened soul or an enlightened being. To approach that state of being, and to do it with devotion, is to try during the course of your me-ness, my me self, to become aligned with that greater self. That's really spiritual practice. That's the day-to-day work. If you are not aware of the self being you, and you are aware of this tiny little me in the state of misery and struggle and occasional happiness, it has work to do. And the work that it has to do is to sit still, have your momentary glimpses of oneness, and let that redirect and reform you as a me. Start to become that which listens to the self. Start to become all of the qualities of personhood that would be acknowledged by and comforted by the self. In other words, start to become a good person. Start to put other people before you. Start to become like a true Christian, or a true Jew, or a true Muslim. Rudy's way of putting it was, judge the success of your spiritual life by the happiness of the people around you. So simple. Begin to create happiness for others. For others. Not for you. For others. Begin to diminish your endless preoccupation with me, and begin to be preoccupied with the rest of the self. That starts to create this alignment. The more you can begin to chop away at the parts of you that say no, or that resist, or don't want to do, or feel put upon by the larger demands of your life, the more you can stop fighting your day-to-day existence and say yes to you, yes to your own being. You start to open a pathway to and a doorway to yourself. That doorway that you open from the me becomes a pathway for the self back into you. And that's what we're working toward. That's why we practice. That's why we have a meditative life. It's to live a life of learning to be aligned with ourselves. And the closer you get to yourself, the closer yourself is to manifesting within you. And you feel it. You can see it in people's eyes, you see it in their faces. You look at people who are becoming themselves, and they radiate. They simply radiate. They look like the best version of themselves. You look at them and you go, why do I love this person? Why do I love them? Because the me has let go, and the self is shining through more and more and more, and you just see it. And the self that you are starts to see clearly the same self in others. And you look at each other and you have this moment of complete acknowledgement of we're one thing, we're one self, we're one being. That's all we are. These separations that cause all the drama and all the tension and all the wars and all the horrible things about human life fall away. And you start to see the other as you. Not as an idea of you, but as you, yourself. That's exactly what you see. Self sees self. And at some point, the me disappears, or becomes what's described in certain writings as a light bulb in the sun. We don't need the light bulb very much when the sun is shining. And so the light bulb still has a little bit of light, but when you become the sun, when you realize you are the sun, the need for ego manifestation is very, very much diminished. But of course you still have a body, you still have a personality, you still have this. There you are. What do you do with that? Well, you put it in service of the self. If you don't, you won't be comfortable. And I certainly am learning. I've had a hard week or two, and I'm learning so much. I mean, I'm learning by the second. I call it my constant tutorial. Awakening is in no ways an ending of spiritual practice, and in some ways it's a beginning of spiritual practice. The last stuff gets burned out. The last stuff gets done. And it's a great process, and you have to give yourself over to that process. You absolutely have to, well, you don't have to, but you won't feel like you have much choice. You just allow yourself to be burned to a crisp. My experience of this last week, which is a strange experience, is of absolute nothingness. I'll tell you, the little remnants of Bruce do not like it. But the self knows it entirely. The first moments of awakening are euphoric. One touches a sense of vastness that is beyond understanding, a sense of love, a sense of qualities that you like, that are likable. But deeper than that, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And I know that's terrifying to the me. The me does not like that. But the self, doesn't matter. Nothingness is something Rudy talked about from the beginning. He said, we are nothing. And there are days where you will experience nothingness. And there are days that you will experience everythingness. They're all part of the same thing. And after a while, you stop having a preference for one or the other. You simply are. You are what is at any given moment. And if you're feeling any kind of resistance or frustration or strangeness in it, it's just the last parts of you getting exposed and washed away. I had a moment this week where I stood up, and I walked into the library area downstairs, and I just stood there and I went, now what? There was nothing I wanted to do, nothing I had to do. I could go upstairs, downstairs, sit. I could do anything. I didn't have any choice. I had no idea. So I just stood there. I stood there for about half an hour. I didn't know what to do with that. I've never had that experience before. But there was literally nothing arising. Nothing. And part of me was very disturbed by it, and then another part of me went, well, just stand here. So I just stood there. And then I think I had to go to the bathroom. Something like that happened, and I was no longer standing there. I had moved on to something else. But it was an extraordinary taste of nothingness. And it's really amazing to watch what moves the body, mind, what moves the me in the world. Something moves it all the time. And I'm telling you, it's often as simple as having to go to the bathroom, having to fill it up with food, wanting some stimulation. It wants these things. And so it takes them. It goes for them. And it has very little to do with you. It's just doing what it does. And so, okay. And then it may say to you, I don't know, write a movie. Or whatever, I mean, it depends on who you are. It may say, write a poem. It may say, well, jump in the river. I don't know what it'll say. But you just do it. It'll lead you. And it will be very natural. It'll be very natural to do whatever it says to do. It'll be very familiar because it'll be very, very much what me, your me, has always been directed to do, but it won't have any opposition. There won't be anything in you fighting what you're told to do. It'll just arise. There won't even be you doing it. It'll just be happening. It's just happening. I do get a sense, in a very strong way, that what myself wants is for me to be sitting here like this, talking to you. I don't know why exactly, except I think it is because it loves you. There is a part of Bruce at this point that doesn't get this anymore. I don't know why I am doing this. I don't know why you're sitting here, exactly. It all seems a little absurd. Sitting here trying to get to where you already are. I mean, I've talked about that. It just makes no sense. You're there. What are we doing? But we are doing. We're here. We're doing it. And I'm told to show up. So I'm showing up. And I will keep this going because somehow it seems to want to go. As long as you show up here and as long as it wants me to sit here, I'll sit here. But it's very interesting how all of the forms and truths of my Bruce life are starting to fall away one after another after another. It's very odd to watch them go. And among them is the value of a spiritual life. On the other hand, this no longer feels like a spiritual life, it feels like life. It just feels like life. This is what's happening. And it seems like the right thing to do or to be. So, as long as you guys show up in this space, there will be something speaking to you. And at some point, I suspect you will all go through exactly what I'm talking about. And if you align yourselves with yourself, or try to do that, there will come a point where this obliteration of your ego mind will be a great relief. You will be very grateful. If that were to happen spontaneously right at this second, I think most of you would freak out completely. If you were aware of the nothingness of your being, I think you would go screaming from the room. But luckily it doesn't tend to do it that way. It does it a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. So when it's finally the time for you to be exposed to the truth of yourself, it will not freak you out. Although some people it does freak out. And it's okay. All I can tell you is there's this little me and there's this great self, and we are the whole thing. And at some point, you will awaken to that. And that everything I'm describing to you now will make perfect sense. And until that happens, you've got work to do. And I'll use the last word again, align. Align yourself with this. See where it goes. Any questions today?
Would you say that self has a timeless quality or element to it?
It is timeless. It is timeless.
Okay.
There's no time in it.
Right.
There's no time at all. Time is completely of the me. There's no time in the self.
I was just wondering about this in terms of what you said about self, how it, I'm trying to wrap my brain around this, something I heard perhaps in the past year, that life can only be understood backwards but has to be looked forwards. I think that's the quote.
That's going to mess you up.
Okay.
Yeah, it appeals
I
totally.
admit it.
It's a total. That's the me wanting to understand the self.
I admit to being messed up.
Can't happen. You're not messed up. You're just a human being who cannot grasp this and will never grasp it. But it's your effort to keep grasping it that may keep you from ever actually knowing it. Give it up. Part of alignment is sitting for 10 minutes without trying to do anything and watch what happens.
So what I just brought up is just somebody's concept of
Your concept, a concept,
Well,
you're owning it at the moment.
it's a quote I heard.
Yeah,
You know.
it's meaningless.
It seemed to make sense.
Well, of course it makes sense in any kind of moment, but then what do you do with the next moment when it doesn't make sense? It's meaningless. It's just meaningless. It's stuff.
Right.
You will understand all this stuff in the end, and you may be able to articulate it in words or poetry or artwork or something. Something may come through. But trying to formulate it as the me is almost impossible. And you can tell people who do it. Their work is violently intellectual. You know, it has.
I mean, that is a purely intellectual type of
It's
statement.
completely. It satisfies nothing of the need to know. Nothing. It hints at it. George?
A couple of things. Why do we come here? I feel like I'm here because you're a teacher who's pointing to a path. And ultimately, I have to go on that path myself. I understand that. But the other thing in my mind is, people with dementia or Alzheimer's. I mean, are they aware or not aware, or they don't know what they're doing either? In a way, are they in an enlightened state, somewhat?
Well, enlightenment is not totally dissimilar from Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is no longer knowing what the me is. The me is collapsing in on itself. It has no memory. It can't function. Now, does that mean that you're automatically enlightened? Not necessarily, but it often looks like. It can look like enlightenment for some people who do it peacefully. But usually the process does not begin peacefully. I've been around it enough to see that it begins with a lot of chaos and fear and confusion, and then slowly, as you really completely forget who you are, something else happens. And the people I've watched, my mother-in-law particularly, at the end of her life, and it wasn't exactly Alzheimer's, but it was dementia, her last moment was, for me, an awakening moment. Because when I went to see her in the hospital in the last hours or so of her life, she was sitting, hooked up to 1 million tubes in bed, and she had had another stroke, and it was pretty much over. And she looked at me like this. And that to me was as close to an enlightened expression as I had ever seen. Well, maybe, because in the end we only go back to the self. We all go back to the self. And so I don't think Alzheimer's is the worst thing in the world. I think it's, it's part of an unwinding process.
Well, letting go of the me.
Yeah, it's letting go of the me, but without you choosing to do that. But in the end, maybe that's true for everybody. We don't really choose to do it. It's chosen, and we participate in that path. So that's what's important. But there's work to do, George. There's work to do, and coming here is not the work. That's the important thing. Coming here can feel like the work. I know getting in the car and driving here and all of that commitment feels good in a way. It feels like I am on the path. But really, you're going to Bruce's house and Blanche's house for a couple hours. And that's good, it's fine, but there's a lot of other hours in that day, and they require as much of a commitment to this path as the effort made to come here. And so you still have a lot of hours available to you to use well. And you have to look at that and go, am I doing that? Not to make yourself crazy and not to beat yourself up if you're not, but any opportunity you see to use those hours well, you should do that. And I would say the simplest version of a practice of using them well is what I said before, but I think it's a great idea. Make other people happy.
You're at your best when you help somebody.
Absolutely. Make Cheryl happy. Make your kids happy. Make the people who work in your store happy and all the customers who come in. And really work it. What can I do? Can I get you a cup of tea, a cup of coffee? Whatever that thing is, that should be, in the simplest way, your practice. You can go bigger than that. There's a lot of things one can do. You can give up your life and your career and go off to, to Asia and or Africa and do social work. But that's not required. It's really not required. It's fine if that's your calling. But what is required is, what do you do in terms of getting your wife a cup of tea? That's really what it comes down to. And that we can all do. That's not hard, although it is. For most people, it's easier to go to Africa and help to help struggling tribes than it is to help your wife. And that's where we go crazy. That's where we lose it, because we don't do the work in front of us. And if you really want this to happen, it takes that. It takes discipline. I know you've been on this diet, which is really wonderful. It's the beginning of a muscle of self-control that starts to say, I care about something bigger and greater than me. I mean, it's not really that, because it's still taking care of George, but it's taking care of George so that George is more present in the world. George is more powerful, directed, more centered, because the diet really does do that. Any discipline is really a kind of alignment. Whatever that is, going to the gym, going for a walk, whatever it is, that's part of the aligning, especially if there's something in you that says, I don't want to do that. Because then it's building a system in you.
Everything else is
No, I know. But that's how people live, not wanting to do. And when you do the thing you don't want to do, or the thing you fear, or the thing you hate, that's how alignment starts to really take place. Fear is a great, great place to go. If you see something you're really afraid of, it's a sign that this is something that wants to be addressed in some form. And if you can do that, it tends to bring you to alignment. Because what is it that's afraid? Ego mind. Ego mind is where fear comes from. It's what keeps you from getting in the temple. It's that temple dog. It keeps you, don't go in there, don't go in there. And so you don't go in there because it's terrifying. But if you go to that dog and say, get out of my fucking way, I'm going in the temple, you go in the temple. And the temple's right there. It's never been hard to get into, except that dog has scared that little ego mind for so long. You have to be willing to take on the work of growing spiritually. And the universe pays attention to that. The self pays attention to that. It's not oblivious to us. It is us. It knows everything. There's nothing. They say God is not mocked. Trust me, the universe knows our intention, our thoughts, our process. It knows everything. So when we start to commit ourselves to this, it acknowledges that. And at some point, it just says, you're ready, and it obliterates you. And it just becomes itself functioning in this space. You become like an avatar. You become a functioning mechanism for the universe itself. You become a channel of love and of wisdom and knowledge, and you may be able to give it to multitudes, or you may just give it to the 5 people in your life. It doesn't matter. You become what it wants you to become. And that's what you have an obligation to, I think, become, because you've been a student of this for 40 years. It's working, but it can go, as you know, deeper, and it can become much more powerful in its expression. You can commit to this much more completely. And so can everybody. I'm not talking to you alone in this. Everybody can. And everybody, in a sense, who wants a spiritual life needs to do that. But if you want a religious Sunday morning church life, then you can have that too, but it doesn't give you the same results. It's different. Coming here once a week is not enough. Marty.
For about the millionth time this morning, you told me to let go. This is something I've been hearing you say since I've known you. The process you're talking about is self-realization, right?
Yeah,
And letting go is letting go of the me.
yeah. That's all it is. Letting go to the best of your ability. It doesn't like to be let go of. The self does everything to reinforce itself, not the self, the me, over and over and over and over. In fact, if you listen to you have to be careful with terminologies here. If you listen to the me all day long, which you do, it's going, I got this problem, I got to do this. I mean, me. That's what goes on all day long. It is a constant chatter, and it's total preoccupation. So how do you get past that? You say, I don't want this. And what does the me do? What do you mean you don't want this? It gets, the smoke screen gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can't see a way through it. It takes charge again. It completely controls you, and only if you're willing to break through it do you ever find freedom. Or, as you just used the word, and it's exactly the word, self-realization. What does self-realization mean? To realize yourself. And that's all it is. It's nothing more than realization. It is realized. Meaning both it's acknowledged, it's witnessed, it's known, and it becomes real. It's real. And when it becomes real for you, you will fall flat on the floor sobbing for days. Because it's so overwhelming. It's so beautiful. And it's always been there. And it was always you. Never for a moment was it not you. You are that. You are that. Why you don't know that is, I can't say it's beyond me because I was in that state for a very long time. So I'm very compassionate and sympathetic and empathetic because I know what it is not to know it. But it's crazy not to know it because it's all there is. And it's the only reason we're here is to know it. And once you know it, it's so wonderful, so beautiful, so complete, so absolute that you go, come on, guys. Come on, let's all do this together. It's so wonderful. Why are you standing in that little hut out there, sort of holding yourself like you're terrified when this gorgeous world is out here? Why? And I know why, because I did it. I'm not any different. But somehow or another, I finally, after years of scrubbing and getting rid of as much as I could get rid of in terms of baggage and stuff, I suddenly got free. It freed me. It was over. It was done. And it's not that hard to arrive at. Although you can't arrive there, you can just be willing to let it come. To be realized. Okay? Anybody else? Bob?
I just want to talk to friends and loved ones that don't want to listen.
Yeah, but you don't try to talk to them about it. It's only it'll frustrate you to pieces. It'll just be the most frustrating thing. I think the answer is be the thing you want to talk about. Be the love. Be it. That's all. That's all you have to do. Be present with them. It's amazing the power of that. Trying to convert people only creates more resistance and hostility. If you guys weren't here on your own will, you would hate me for saying all this stuff. A lot of you hate me anyway for saying all this stuff. But the truth is, I have to say it, and I say it, and I try to be it. Be it. You can be it. I know you are it. And just be that for everybody. And I have family members who this is not a dialogue we can ever have. So we talk about other stuff, cars. Electronics. It works. It completely works. Because the love that comes through that is very real. And as long as the love is behind it, it happens. It gets communicated. People don't hear the words anyway. They experience the connection and they experience the presence. And everyone in this room can do that, be present. The minute you try to direct somebody else's life, give them the better answer, you create a wall, not an openness. When they want to have you open that door, they'll give you permission. They'll give you the key. They really will. They'll hand it over to you. And they'll say something to you like, what do you know something that I don't know? What is it you know? How come I can tell it in the way you look at me. I can tell it in how calm you are. What do you know? Tell me. Key, open, walk through the door. But don't walk too far, because they only want to let you in a little bit. You can actually just say, I just love you. I just love you. That will blow them out of the water. It's amazing how a little bit of love goes a long way. And when you really open and you really touch self, one of the characteristics of self, is when it has character, is love. Lots of love, unconditional love. So, does that answer?
Yeah, you made a lot of comments on, point me and point self. And recently I had a pretty profound experience. It was like 3 days of just not being me. Yeah, it was just, I was just in a place of awe and no desire. And I found myself asking the question, what am I now? And then it went away.
It'll be back.
Yes.
It'll be back.
And, yeah. And so what I'd love to hear some comments on is how to be with, the in-between.
Don't fight it. Do not fight it. It is process. It's just process. It's, the difference is you're looking at it as though you had an experience of, where in fact what happened was there was no you for 3 days. You didn't have any experience. It was. It is. And then the me, the person returns. Bill suddenly was there again. And rather than fight it and be angry at Bill for having returned and thinking you've lost something, just accept this. The faster and the deeper you accept it as it is, the more opportunity the self has to return to its expression, full expression. It's a wonderful thing. Just know it is that. And what you felt was completely real. And even once you've completely awakened, there's this thing, I've talked about it in some of my other talks, where the personality comes back. I call it bruising, and you'll call it billing, but it will come back, and there it will be, and you'll look at it like, I thought you were gone. And then at that point, though, this is running the show, and this little thing is now trying to take control, and at that point you can just go like that. And it has no, yourself is in charge. It's all a good thing. It's working. And, don't feel a loss. Just walk around being available. Be the self that wants to be.
Yeah. What I feel is calling me forth is just be compassionate wherever I am.
Yeah.
And there's lots of sadness.
Yeah.
It's the missing, the longing, and
It gets really intense. Yeah. It can happen even afterward. For me, this last week was full of sadness and even a kind of depression. And I began to see it was more like an atmospheric depression that was not mine. It just was.
Yeah.
It was just there. And I had identified with it as it being somehow Bruce, but it wasn't Bruce at all. It was just there. And I think probably many people must have felt it because it was, there it was. And it had sadness in it. You know, these are just things that happen. And you begin to become much more aware of these things going on, and then you just stop identifying and let it be. The need to identify it and to give it judgment of this is good, this is bad, kind of is old patterning. What starts to happen is you just go, this is, period. Because a lot of things will come up. But the compassion for others and for yourself becomes very strong. I was talking to a good friend yesterday who's an awakened guy, and he just said that when you awaken, you have no defenses. You have zero defenses. So if somebody yells at you, if Blanche gets angry at me, it goes so deep. It goes so deep, you might as well have taken a spear and put it in my heart. You know, it has that kind of quality. There's nothing you can do about it, except resonate, let it happen, let it work its way through, and then move on. But it's just what it is. I went to a wedding the other day. I walked into the wedding, I started just getting so sobby. I mean, it was like somebody I hardly knew. It was a guy who used to work here who I like a lot. But I didn't know anybody at the whole place. I got so overwhelmed with emotion. It was like not my emotion, it was the emotion. The whole room was emotion. And it was so beautiful, it was so overwhelming. But it's no longer a Bruce event. It's just the event. And that's what you'll experience.
I also find it's like, what do I say? You know, this person or that person, or
You don't have to say anything. It'll say it. You don't have to be in charge of that. You're not in charge of that. It speaks. I don't have a clue to what I'm going to say when I sit here. It just comes out, and it's not Bruce talking. And it won't be Bill talking. It'll be the thing that wants. Yes?
You know, it seems to me like at this point that the only way to get in touch with this self is through doing these concentration, meditations.
Kind of. It helps. It's a way. There's a lot of other ways, car accidents. I mean, there's lots of ways to get in touch with it, and sometimes just sitting around reading a book. Boom, there it is. It's about intention, of wanting it in a way, and letting it happen. And a lot of people I know, the more I talk about this, the more angry and frustrated they get, because they don't know what to do and they want it so badly. That's a good thing too. Being really pissed about not having it has a really powerful, attractive energy, if you understand that. I mean, wanting it really badly is important. When I was a kid and I wanted something badly and I told my parents I wanted it every day for 4 months leading up to Christmas, I got it. That's how it works. If I told them once and expected them to remember, it would never have happened. Be persistent. Okay? You're there. Trust me. You're just, it's like... Anyone else? Okay. Thank you. Quickly, next week, Blanche and I are going back and forth about the idea of having everybody stay Sunday afternoon for Memorial Day weekend for a barbecue. We go back and forth because it's a lot of work. and if we'll send out an invitation. If we get enough responses of people who want to come, we'll do it. If we don't, then we'll write you back and say we're not doing it. But we'll see what kind of feelings there are about it. It would just mean staying and spending the afternoon and going home in the evening. So it's a possibility, and it's a lot more relaxed. In truth, I actually feel some of the best spiritual experience has nothing to do with sitting in a class. I think the class formalizes it in ways that complicate life. And so a lot of the time it's just sitting in the back of the house and we just have a word or two and it has as much impact as a whole class. So it might be a good thing to do. I'm leaving the following day for London for 2 months, and then I'll be back. There will be a class or so when I'm gone, and then the rest of the summer we'll continue with classes. So you're all welcome. Anyway, thanks for coming today.